When you hear the name Ulysses S. Grant, what comes to mind? Probably the toughest nails general who won the Civil War, right? But President Grant? That's a whole different story. For like a century, his presidency was considered a total disaster, one of the worst, period. But that's changing, big time. Historians are taking a second look, and what they're finding is pretty fascinating. So let's dive into the complex legacy of America's 18th president. And this slide, this really gets to the heart of it. On the one hand, you've got the hero, the guy who led the Union to victory. Can't argue with that. But on the other, the president? For so long, he was ranked at the absolute bottom. I mean, dead last. So how does that happen? How can one person be both of those things? That's exactly what we're going to try to figure out. Okay, so to really get Grant's presidency, you have to picture the scene. It's 1869. The Civil War is technically over, but the country is just broken. It's fractured, angry, and trying to figure out what it even is anymore. So Grant wasn't just stepping in to be president. He was basically tasked with putting a shattered nation back together. And on top of all that, he had to tackle the single most explosive issue of the day: what to do about the rights of millions of newly freed African Americans. And this is where the whole story starts to shift. It's why historians are looking at him so differently now. Because Grant did something pretty radical for his time. He took a hard, forceful stand on civil rights. We're talking long before it was the popular thing to do. And this, it turns out, is maybe the most powerful part of his entire legacy. 15th. Just think about that number. It might not seem like much on its own, but it is everything when it comes to understanding President Grant. This number represents a massive, earth-shattering change to American democracy. And Grant, he threw every ounce of his political power into making it a reality. Yep, the 15th Amendment. Under Grant's watch, the U.S. Constitution was fundamentally changed. It now said that the right to vote couldn't be denied because of a person's race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Now, you have to understand, back then, this was a huge deal, a really radical idea. And Grant wasn't just a bystander. He pushed hard for it to pass, and, just as importantly, to be enforced. And look, for Grant, this wasn't just some political move. It wasn't just about getting a law on the books. He really, genuinely believed in it. He saw it as the federal government's absolute duty to protect its citizens, especially the ones who were most vulnerable. That kind of thinking put him way, way ahead of his time. And it also put him on a collision course with some really powerful, angry people. And he didn't just talk the talk, he walked the walk. When violent groups like the Ku Klux Klan started popping up to terrorize and suppress Black voters, Grant didn't mess around. His plan was simple and direct. Step 1, get the legal authority by signing the enforcement acts. Step 2, send in federal marshals to enforce those laws. And Step 3, arrest and prosecute these guys. And it worked. His administration arrested hundreds of Klan members and pretty much crushed the KKK, at least the first version of it. So the fight for civil rights was obviously a huge part of his presidency, but that wasn't the whole story. Grant was also in charge of a nation that was rebuilding and changing in so many other ways. I mean, the economy was transforming and America's place in the world was shifting too. You know, during his 2 terms, the country was just exploding with growth. It was industrializing like crazy. Think about it. Railroads are crisscrossing the country. New factories are popping up everywhere. The whole economy was shifting into a higher gear. And Grant's administration was right in the middle of it, trying to manage this incredible expansion. He also had a really big win on the world stage. There was this major beef brewing with Great Britain. See, during the Civil War, they had built some warships for the Confederacy, like the famous CSS Alabama, and the U.S. was not happy about it. Now, they could have gone to war over it, but instead, Grant's team chose to talk it out. They went the route of diplomacy, and it led to this huge, peaceful agreement. And here's the payoff: a check for $15.5 million from Great Britain to the U.S. Now, in today's money, you're talking well over $300 million. It was a massive diplomatic victory, and maybe more importantly, it kept them out of another war. All right, so we've covered the good stuff, but you can't talk about President Grant without talking about the bad, and there was a lot of it. We got to flip the coin over and look at the scandals and the struggles that, honestly, for a very long time, were the only things people remembered about his presidency. The first really big hit came from the economy. Right as Grant was kicking off his second term, bam, the country gets slammed by this massive financial crisis. It's known as the Panic of 1873. And the result was just catastrophic. This wasn't just a little dip in the market, it was a full-on nationwide depression. Banks were failing left and right. Businesses were closing their doors for good. Unemployment went through the roof. The whole country got dragged into this long, painful recession. And whether it was fair or not, Grant's administration got the blame. The other huge problem, corruption. But here's the really weird part. By all accounts, Grant himself was an honest guy. The problem was, one of his best qualities as a general, his fierce loyalty to his guys, turned into his worst weakness as president. He just trusted people too much. He gave jobs to friends and allies who, well, let's just say they took advantage of his trust. And because he was so loyal, a whole wave of scandals just washed over his administration. The two most famous ones were probably the whiskey ring, where a bunch of officials, including his own personal secretary, were skimming millions in liquor tax money. Then there was the Credit Mobilier scandal, which involved bribes and railroad construction fraud. These scandals were a huge deal. They completely destroyed public trust and basically defined his presidency for the next 100 years. So you've got these incredible achievements on one side and these terrible failures on the other. What do you do with that? How do you even begin to make sense of a president like Grant? Well, that brings us right back to where we started, how historians are looking at him today. This chart right here, it pretty much sums up the entire shift in thinking. The old way of looking at him, the then column, it was all about the scandals and the economic crash, just a failed president. But the new view, the now column, it focuses way more on his bold, really courageous fight for civil rights. And in that light, he doesn't look like a failure at all. He looks like a really important, consequential president. Yeah, this quote says it perfectly. The conversation has totally shifted. Instead of just focusing on what his appointees did wrong, we're now looking at what he tried to do right for the country. His commitment to justice, his efforts to actually rebuild the nation. That's what's starting to define his presidency now. So what the story of Ulysses S. Grant really shows us is that history isn't just some dusty old book. It's not set in stone. As time goes on, as we learn more, and as our own values change, the way we see the past can change too. It kind of makes you wonder, right? Whose story is next? Who's another historical figure we've written off as a failure that we might one day see in a totally new light?